Okay, welcome everybody. Thanks for joining us today. We're going to have a great program this evening. Hopefully, the traffic wasn't too much for you. I had a heck of a time getting out of Morristown, I tell you. Makes you crazy. Somewhere I've got some notes here. Housekeeping. Janice, do you want to say some words about housekeeping? I remembered. Janice is really the boss.
Today is our second anniversary of being in this headquarters. So I think we're good. We'd like to have everybody put their phones on mute or off or whatever, so it doesn't disturb everybody else while we're talking. And everybody sitting in the white chairs, leave them when you stand up to leave. What's going to happen when the program is over? We're going to meet over in the headquarters because the corporate cleaners have to come in and, they're on labor hours. So they have to clean up as fast as they can. So if we just leave the white chairs there, everybody just move on over. Everything moves. The speaker will move over there as well, and all the food. So have a good time.
Thank you.
Oh, there you go.
So once again, thank you all. Do we have any new members here tonight? Sir?
My first time here.
Okay. And I know who you are, but maybe you can tell the other folks.
I'm Tom Anchor. I live in New York. I run the New Jersey room with the New York Public Library. I've been a member for a few months, and I've seen some of the programs. This is the first time.
Welcome. And we are doing an exhibit in the library, and we're having a great time and a good partnership. So thank you very much for being here tonight and for partnering with us.
Brave enough to come to Newark. The opening is on June 12th.
We went and delivered the exhibit the other day, and we were not harmed. So please brave and make a visit. Many of you you members got election ballots in the mail. My back pocket. Okay, just hold it until, yeah, thank you, dear. Yeah. I started something now. Okay, all right. So please fill out your ballots and send them in at your earliest convenience. There's a newsletter in the works. It should be out by the end of the month. It's going to be another double issue, so hopefully you enjoyed the last one. Did you folks read the insert with the last one? Did you like that? Yes? No? Don't remember. Okay, well, you're going to get another one this time around too, so hopefully you'll like that one. Volunteers. Where is Bobby? Bobby, stand up and show everybody who you are, because this is the lady who organizes our volunteers. We're having a volunteer luncheon next week, and so I know we've got a lot of people already signed up, but we always need more volunteers. We're always doing more things than we've got people to do. So if you'd like to help us out, if you'd like to do some interesting stuff along with the Canal Society, please see Bobby. And if you'd like, please see her, and please join us for our luncheon next week at Waterloo. Okay, we got lots and lots of events coming up. This is the busy part of the year. Tomorrow, we're going to be at the Lake Capacon Block Party. That's tomorrow. Busy weekend. On the 22nd, it will be Waterloo Canal Day, another large event partnering with our friends in Byram Township. Wharton Canal Day is going to be on August the 24th. And I guess that's all the ones that I've got listed right now. John Prytow is not here, our archivist, but as we've told you before, our archives are now open for appointments. Some people have been coming to visit us and using our archives to look up all kinds of things that they're interested in. Please consider doing that. You can come and see me, or you can contact John directly. We've got lots of wonderful things in the archives and we're getting more stuff all the time. So please come and join us and use our archives. We've got lots and lots of projects going on, lots of Greenway projects. We talked to you about the lock project in Wharton. That is hopefully coming to an end shortly. The mechanical parts of the lock are still not shipped, however, so we're still crossing our fingers that the project is going to be done on schedule. At Plane 3 in Ledgewood, they're doing a clearing of the landscape. They're uncovering sleeper stones. They're rebuilding stonework. They're doing a marvelous job of fixing up that piece of property, and we're going to be doing a sign project for them next year, like we've done to so many other places, and making it a self-explanatory experience for anybody, not just our canal guys wandering. Yes. And also in Dover, Princeton Avenue, Dover got themselves a really nice grant and they put in a beautiful trail parallel to Princeton Avenue from Waterworks Road to Blackwell Avenue, Route 46. It's a short trail, but it's just a start, but it's very nice. It's going to be officially opened in early June. And so we're very proud of our partnership with them doing that. Okay, before we get started with our program, Bill McKelvey, you have a show and tell for us.
I guess it's easier to do it here because then you can get me, right? First of all, I want to recognize my sister and brother-in-law, raise your hand, that are here for the first time at this location. I also want to thank Joe for the maroon T-shirt. I love it. It's got that DNR steam canal boat on the back. Beautiful, beautiful. I recently took a trip down to South Jersey because I attended the New Jersey Transaction Conference. It's the New Jersey Transportation Conference that was started by Frank Riley like 40 years ago. And this year they moved to Harrah's, and it was quite an experience. I never saw people walk dogs through a classy hotel before, but that's the way it is nowadays. On my way down, I delivered yet another carload to the New Jersey Maritime Museum in Beach Haven, and I left some flyers on the table over here. If you ever get down that way on a rainy day, you're at the shore, what a marvelous place to spend a day. They have just jam-packed full of artifacts, memorabilia, photographs, paintings, ship models, you name it. They are just loaded with it. And they have a full selection of New Jersey Canal books in their library. They also have all of my non-canal color slide programs. They are all down there now. While I was there, I picked up they have DVDs that are for the taking, and I just picked up a few. This is one I found in my collection, narrowboats in England, like a tutorial of how to operate and what you run into with the locks and whatnot. And then from the Maritime Museum, New Jersey coastal storms, films that were taken over a period of like 45, 50 years. Buildings on the ocean front moving from the ocean to the bay, on their own, just moving across the island. These will be in the Canal Society archives, and okay to borrow them, I guess, or come and look. Elco, the PT boat manufacturer in Bayonne, lovely documentary video on it. Underwater, I don't know what that was. The Zeppelin, one on the Zeppelin, one on the motor vessel Marine Electric, which ran into a disaster, and the wind ship Lucy, which was a landmark on Long Beach Island for many, many years. They floated it in a huge 3-masted schooner, big, big vessel. And they got it into a dredge dock and filled in around it. And it was a gift shop for years and years and years. And then it burned. I also have found in my collection 1993, the Canal Society of New Jersey trip to the Canal du Midi in France. And sad to say, there's nobody alive that was on it except me. But some great photos of Frank Mentone, the Lamson, the whole Lamson family was there, Frank, Fred Heidi and whatnot. And several of my DNR Canal programs, which the Barts had a friend of theirs scan the slides and they're in PowerPoint. Maybe it'll save the Canal Society of trouble in getting someday I want to show some of my slides, but they got to get into digital format first. So transaction was great. They broke the highest number of people they ever had, 101,100 people. And on the way back, I stopped off at Bivalve. That's a little town in South Jersey next to the town named Shell Pile. And that's where, oystering was big down there. And that's the oyster schooner. Yeah, I just went blank. I can't think of the name. It's preserved and it operates on tours. And in fact, it comes up to Liberty State Park once a year. So basically that's it. This is another donation to Canal Society of New Jersey.
Thank you, Bill. I wish I would have known about some of those interesting towns driving back. So anyway, I'm not wearing this hat just to keep my head warm. We've got hats and shirts and all kinds of goodies. Please, when the program is over, we're going to open up the archives in the office. Please join us in there. We've got to clear out this space so they can clean up, but please do. Yes. Gift shop will be open. So, all right. Tonight, Ryan is going to present about George Macculloch. Now, we all know about George Macculloch, right? Well, what do we really know about George Macculloch? Well, we're going to find out a lot about George and some things about his house, Macculloch Hall. So I'm going to give Ryan the floor. Thank you, sir.
Well, thank you for having. Thank you, Peter. Thank you for having me here today. I really appreciate being invited here. We had 3 great lectures over at Macculloch Hall with Joe and Tim. We very much appreciated them coming and a lot of you coming to the museum. So I'm really excited to be here. And then Joe and Tim asked me to talk about George Macculloch. I've been at Macculloch Hall for 23 and a half years. So you would think I would know a lot about George Macculloch. On most of our tours, talk about George Macculloch for a few minutes, then get into the canal a little bit more. But when they asked me, I was like, oh, this will be a nice challenge to try to come up with some more George Macculloch information past the 5-minute mark. So we'll give it a shot tonight and see what happens. But I want to introduce you all to Macculloch Hall Historical Museum in case you have not been there before. We're located in Morristown, right on Macculloch Ave, just a couple blocks south of South Street. It's a great historic house. We have a couple acres of gardens in the back. We have period galleries. You could see in the top that we do decorate for the holidays. Right now, the gardens in the back, which you could see in the lower corner here near me, the flowers are just gorgeous. We have historic wisteria on the back porch. It's just finishing blooming right now. Usually blooms the first couple of weeks in May, sometimes the last couple of weeks in April, depending on the climate of the year. But just beautiful flowers. If there's any gardeners, we do have the 2 acres back there. It's just gorgeous to walk around, nice, peaceful place to come. People come for lunch and just relax. It's just a great place. So I encourage you all to come. The gardens are open free of charge every day during daylight hours. And we love to welcome people in the gardens. So you could go back there without coming into the museum. So yeah, please do enjoy them. So how did the museum get started? W. Parsons Todd purchased the house, George Macculloch's house, and turned it into a museum in 1950. In 1950, the house was in very bad disrepair. There had been 5 generations of the Macculloch family, Miller family, Post family, all descendants of George and Louisa Macculloch, who lived there until 1947. When Mr. Todd purchased it, he had to put in a lot of money to preserve the house and basically restore it to what it looks like today. We constantly are doing preservation projects for the museum today, which is when you guys moved in here 2 years ago. I was very happy to hear you had a nice space, and I was also very happy to hear that it was a newer building and you wouldn't have all these preservation projects that we always have to do. It has its pros and cons.
Add one thing. Mr. Todd was a very wealthy man. He owned the Quincy mine up in the Upper Peninsula of Michigan. Here's Michigan State like a thumb, like a hand, and here is the Upper Peninsula.
Yep.
This is where the Quincy mine is, up here.
Yeah. So yeah, and he was former mayor of Morristown, was mayor twice of Morristown, very involved in politics in town, just like George Macculloch was 200 years ago. He was an avid collector. So there's no direct relation to Christy Todd Whitman or to Mary Todd Lincoln. Those are the two that most visitors ask us about. Mr. Todd was actually related to Dolly Madison through her first husband, John Todd. So that's his famous connection with people. So we do have some Dolly Madison things in our collection. He collected 18th century, 19th century period fine and decorative arts for the museum. 90% of our collection at the museum, Mr. Todd collected specifically for the museum. So thanks to Mr. Todd, we have a wonderful collection. He also collected the works of Thomas Nast. Sorry about that.
And the chandeliers from the Twombly's.
Yep, he collected from all sorts of auctions throughout the 1930s through 1950s. So Thomas Nast, who I usually speak about, so anyone wants to talk about Thomas Nast, be happy to talk about Nast afterwards. We have the largest Thomas Nast collection in the world at Macculloch Hall. Thomas Nast is known as the father of American political cartooning. He is famous for drawing the Democratic donkey, the Republican elephant, Santa Claus, Uncle Sam in Columbia. Also got his start during the Civil War, making his name in Harper's Weekly there, and also helped to take down Boss Tweed and Tammany Hall in the early 1870s. So he had a pretty important career. His political cartoons were very powerful at the time. When he was drawing, he drew for Harper's Weeklies for about 25 years, from the early 1860s through the mid 1880s. He was very influential as well. He illustrated 6 different presidential elections, and each candidate that he supported would go on to become the president of the United States. So he was very influential in his artwork. With literacy rate being lower at that period, people could just look at his pictures and really get the message that he was talking about. So we have a wonderful collection. We have our Thomas Nast Gallery right in the center hall. We do 2 to 3 exhibits a year. We always put up his Christmas exhibits, of course, in December. So you'll always see Santa Clauses. Coming this fall, I'll be doing a presidential exhibit to go along with the election that we have coming up. So we always try to mirror what's going on today with some of our Thomas Nast collection. I'll get the hang of this. Two of our newer Thomas Nast pieces that we have are these grand caricaturamas. These are 7 by 11 feet paintings. If you were at Tim and Joe's lectures, you saw them in our schoolroom gallery. They're quite big and impressive. If you haven't seen them, I would welcome you to come visit and see them. They're really beautiful paintings. They were made as part of a stage show. Thomas painted these in 1867. They were paraded across a stage in front of an audience. There would be someone playing the piano. There was also someone speaking about them. And they basically told the story from the landing at Plymouth through the United States at that time, which was the Reconstruction period here right after the Civil War. There were 33 altogether. Only 8 of them exist today. 2 at the museum. There's one at the Morristown and Morris Township Library, just down the corner from the museum. The other 5 are at the Library of Congress, and they have not been out of storage since the 1970s. So if you want to see any of these, you have to come to Morristown. So ours are a Civil War piece and a Reconstruction piece. A lot of satire, a lot of symbolism in them. Really, really great pieces that he drew and painted. So now we get to George Macculloch finally. When I was asked to talk about George Macculloch, I was like, okay, what are we going to talk about? You guys know much more about the canal than I could ever tell you. So I'm like, we need to talk about George Macculloch, the man. So we'll learn about his background, his early life here in Morristown and Morris County, and then get a bit into his involvement with the canal. I tried to pick out pieces, things from our collection that maybe some of you haven't seen before. So I tried to find things that hopefully are new to you, and hopefully you could then use in your interpretation of the Morris Canal as well. So we start off with his classic portrait. We have this painting of George hanging in the drawing room. And he was, as you could see from his painting, well off. He was a well-educated person. He was an influential person. At Macculloch Hall, they entertained quite a bit, and it became sort of a household where they would discuss philosophy and politics and religion and all things like that. It was a gathering place in the neighborhood. It was one of the bigger houses, as you'll see, and it just became a place for people to gather and to learn from each other. So a lot of people, when they come to Macculloch Hall, ask us, how do we wind up with the spelling of George Macculloch's name? If you've seen any letters written by him, you've probably seen different signatures, different spellings of his name. So this first picture I have here, the large nameplate, was passed down and through oral history at the museum was said to have been one of the original nameplates for the house. And you could see it spelled M lowercase c large c U-L-L-O-C-H. The spelling we use now is M-A-C-C-U-L-L-O-C-H, all lowercase. You could see 2 of his signatures there. By 1822, he was using the signature, the spelling that we use today at Macculloch Hall. But it doesn't seem very consistent at times. So I want to bring history into the present. So yesterday I went out and I took these 2 pictures because I was like, I haven't looked at the street signs. I drive to work every day and home every day. I barely look at the street signs, but I said, I think one of the street signs is not spelled how we spell the name. So Macculloch Hall is right on McCulloch Avenue between Miller and Farragut. So on one side, at the Miller side, you have M-A small c, large c. And then at the Farragut place, you have M and then all lowercase letters. So even today, people do not know how to spell Macculloch. So we use the lowercase spelling. Have used that, but even on the street, there is no consistency in the spelling of his name. So I know one of your members, Carl, had asked me to talk a little bit about this. I thought it was a little funny and a little bit interesting too. So this is the way we spell George Macculloch's name and a little bit about his background, which is quite interesting and a bit of a mystery. George Macculloch's parents, William Macculloch and question mark. Yes, I did not forget to put in his mother's name. We do not know who George Macculloch's mother is. This is one thing that I've always tried to research, tried to find out. Generations of museum staff before me have tried to find out, and family members were in touch with descendants. We've all tried to find out who George Macculloch's mother is. Nobody knows. What we do know is that his father was a captain in the East India Company from 1760 to 1783. And George was born in Bombay, India in 1775. We do not know if his mother was from Scotland like his father was. We do not know if his mother was from India. This is something, as I mentioned, that we always would love to find out. A lot of these East India Company records don't exist anymore. We've had people, trustees and past staff members go to Scotland to try to research the family more. We found all sorts of other family members, but there's no mention of his mother in these documents. So that's one of the biggest mysteries that we have about George Macculloch. And hopefully one day we will be able to figure out. George did have a couple siblings, Maria and Henry. Both passed away in India as children. And then his father also died. And the only one reference we have is killed by poison or otherwise. Again, not the satisfaction you want when you're doing research of what happened to William Macculloch. So we say he may have been poisoned or otherwise, but we really don't know, again, what happened to his father, and would love to find out more about his mother. So there's a bit of a mystery about George Macculloch's past. So when his dad passed away, George was sent, he was just about 7 years old, back to Scotland to live with his paternal grandmother and grandfather. And we know it was his paternal grandparents. We wish it was his maternal grandparents, then we would know more about his mom, but unfortunately it's not. So he was raised in Barholm, Scotland. He was very well educated there. This is an older picture of the family residence. They came from certain wealth. At that time, it was a fairly nice house for them. He attended the University of Edinburgh, was very well educated as well. After college, after university, he went and became part of a financial firm, Johnson, McCulloch and Law, and he worked in the export trade. We believe it was wool and sugar that he was trading at that time. He traveled all around. He wound up living in Madrid for a while. He lived in Paris for a while. He also lived in London for a while. So he was involved in finance to some extent. Again, a lot of the early information we don't know about George, and we try to build and find out so that we can interpret his early life a little bit better than we're able to. Here's an more recent picture of Barholm, where he grew up. So you could see after restoration, it looks a bit better. This picture is probably from about 15 years ago or so. But a nice place where he lived. When George was traveling around, went to London, he wound up meeting Louisa Edwina Sanderson. And they would go on to have 2 children and then get married. And yes, I said that in the correct order. So they had their son Francis in 1801. They had their daughter Mary Louisa in 1804. After they had Mary Louisa, they did get married in 1804. Having children before marriage was not as uncommon back then as we may think today. So it did happen from time to time. But Louisa was a very important person in George's life. They were partners in life, partners in running some of their businesses, as you'll see as we get to some of the things they did. In Morristown, she was one of the heads of the Female Charitable Society, which still exists today as cornerstones family programs in Morris County. So a very important thing that she led for 33 years of her life. She was also part of the Female Charitable Society, the Fragment Society, which made clothes for those in need. And she was also a founder of helped to build St. Peter's Episcopal Church, which is just a couple blocks away from where Macculloch Hall stands. So she was really very much a community-minded person like George was, and a very strong woman. She was educated as well. She could read. We have one portrait of her in the museum where she holds a book, which was important to her that people would know that she was literate at the time. So that's very important. Their kids were also very well educated. Both went to private school, even their daughter Mary, which was not common for the time, but education was always at the forefront for George and Louisa and was very important to them. So they came from London. They lived in New York, 1806, lived there for about 3 or 4 years. They wound up purchasing some land out in Morris County in 1808, but it wasn't until 1810 that they started to build Macculloch Hall. So they built Macculloch Hall in 3 sections. They bought land and a small bank house from General Doughty, one of Washington's aides during the Revolution. And that's the lower section that you really can't see here on the left side. And that's where 1765 house stood. On top of that house, they built their 1810 section. In 1812, 2 years later, they added the center hall and a bedroom above. And then in 1819, they added the west wing of the house, and that was to accommodate the boys' Latin school that George and Louisa had at Macculloch Hall.
And you can tell the change in the brick color with each addition.
You can. From this picture, it's harder to tell, but if you look at the building, you can actually see lines on it where the 3 sections are. So when we have school groups or architectural tours, you could actually point out where the builds took place. The brick just does change slightly. Originally, the entire house was whitewashed, so you do see some white residue on the bricks as well. The parging was meant to protect the bricks. In the 1950s, the parging was taken off of the house. We almost wish it was kept on because then the bricks would be in much better condition, and we weren't.
Is this Pruden brick?
Yeah, it is from Prudentown. Yep. But it's a beautiful house, 27 rooms, over 1 million bricks to build the house. They bought 25 acres of land, added an extra acre, had a total of 26 acres of land there. So it gives you an idea of the wealth of the Maccullochs at the time, which was also very important. Brick houses were not common. That was usually set aside for town halls and public buildings. Private homes were mostly the wood clapboards still at the time. So to have a nice big brick house like this was unusual. To get the full picture of George, we have to talk about that George did employ Irish servants at his house and also had enslaved people working at his house. we're trying to broaden our interpretation of the enslaved workers and the Irish servants at the museum. Throughout the museum, we have a touch tours, and we have some didactics up to tell you a little bit more information about what was going on at the museum or what was going on at the home when the Maccullochs lived here. So we know that George and Louisa came to Morristown with Cato, Susan, Elizabeth, and a child, Emma, who were enslaved at the time. And then William Henry and Helen were born into slavery at Macculloch Hall. We have just a few primary sources that mention the enslaved people at the museum. And the one I put here, I thought was pretty telling, where George wrote, "Our own boy Henry, after receiving ample provisions of winter clothes, a set of new shirts, hat and coat, went off 3 weeks ago and is supposed to be now in New York. Peace and prosperity be with him. We are well rid of him and did not move a single step to recover him." So the key word in there is recover. The enslaved people were treated as property, and they did not try to recover him. So whatever you think about George and Louisa, this just may add to the interpretation of that. We have some pieces in the collection that were owned by the first generation of the Maccullochs to live there, George and Louisa. And I think they're pretty telling about the type of people they were. We have one porcelain piece. It's actually two porcelain pieces. It's a tea bowl and saucer. And you could see Louisa's initials in the center there. And this was probably made early on, because if you look close, there's a L, M, lowercase c, and a large c. So they were still using that small c in there at this time. So this was probably still early on before they went to all lowercase. It's a beautiful piece of porcelain. We don't have the whole set. You could see there's gilding on the edge of the cup there. Originally on the edge of the saucer, there was gilding. It's a Fitzhugh pattern, Chinese export. Shows the wealth of the Maccullochs at the time. We have their original family clock. We have 3 tall place clocks in the museum. This one belonged to the Maccullochs. It dates to about 1800. May have been brought over with the Maccullochs when they came to the United States from Europe. We're not quite sure, but it's been in the museum, the house and the museum ever since. We have photographs of it in the house from the late 1800s. It's beautiful hand-painted face and beautiful casework as well. The one chair I show you is from their set of dining room chairs that they would have had. They're Hitchcock-style chairs, nice chairs. We have what I think are nicer chairs in the museum. But it gives you an idea. They were wealthy, but they did save in certain places as well. One last piece that I wanted to show you is George Macculloch's Campeche chair. And Campeche chairs were a sign of wealth at the time. Thomas Jefferson and James Madison both had Campeche chairs in their inventories. George Macculloch's neighbor, James Collis, had a Campeche chair. He lived right next door. That Campeche chair that James Collis had is now at the Metropolitan Museum of Art. So for George to get this chair, he was trying to say that he was of the status of these other men at the time. He was trying to achieve greatness, and by having this type of furnishing at that time, he was trying to show his wealth and his influence. We had this chair just restored a year ago, so you could see newer leather on there. The blacker leather is original leather. This chair had been up in the attic for many, many years, and finally we're able to get it out and get it restored so that we could display it for everybody to see. It was in the inventory labeled as Grandpa's chair after George had died. So the chair was important in the family. We know that, and we believe it was probably very important to George.
Who restores a chair?
Yeah, so one of our challenges as a museum is trying to find people who can do the conservationists who can do the proper conservation. We found this person, he's an upholsterer, and he's up in New York near the Albany area. And he came down and he's retired now, but he gets to pick and choose his project. And luckily we're one of his favorites. So he was able to do this. We gave him the research we had. He did some more research. We talked about exactly what we wanted. When we do conservation, everything we need to do has to be reversible. Because in 30, 50, 100 years, they find out we did it wrong. It needs to be taken apart. So everything we did to the chair is reversible. So if we find out that the leather's wrong, they could take that out and do it, redo the leather, or just leave it as the shell of the chair like it was when we found it. We also had him keep that little section open that you could see in the front there, the front rail. That's just stuffed with horsehair. That was the cushioning for the chair. So not that comfortable of a chair. And it's hard to see here, but it actually does bubble out. It does actually have a lumbar support in there. And if you see it in person, you could see it a little better. So I always thought that was kind of cool. So I mentioned that education was very important to the Maccullochs. They opened the Boys Latin School, which ran for about 15 years at Macculloch Hall. The schoolroom where Tim and Joe spoke in the last few months, that was the schoolroom. That's where the boys went to school. They had, it was called George Macculloch or Mr. Macculloch's Latin School. Ran from 1814 to 1829. George did some teaching. He also employed a schoolmaster, and Mrs. Macculloch, Louisa, did a lot of the disciplining for the school. George spoke 5 different languages, a very well-educated person. And as I mentioned, their kids both went to private school as well. These are original desks from the school, from George's school, as well as the clock that you see there that I just showed you. And you'll see a little better picture of the schoolmaster's desk, which is the original desks and one of the school balls that they had. So the room was built in 1819, so it was really 9 years that the boys would have used the school. It was a boarding school. They slept upstairs. They had their dining hall in the basement, went to school on the main level of the house. A couple quotes we have about the schoolboys in our archives. The schoolboys let the mince pie burn. The boys were pretty mischievous. We do have graffiti on the building from the Boykin brothers who were there. Also inside one of the desks, they did some carvings as well. So we have some 19th century graffiti. And the other one is from Louisa to their son, Francis. Your father is very busy preparing for New York. He will leave us on Saturday with 4 boys. I remain home with 10. What with the charge of them and cleaning the house, I shall not want for employment. So the Maccullochs did have a sense of humor, a little bit at least. Besides the schoolroom being used as the school, it was also used by the Episcopalians who didn't have their church yet built until 1828 when they built St. Peter's. So they did have church services in that room as well. And they also used that room for some theater. So it was sort of a community room as sorts. So as I mentioned, George and Louisa were very community-minded people as well. So in 1820, the following notice was there about how they had at Mr. Macculloch's Academy, the tragedy Cato was being performed. So it was very much used by the whole town at that time. In our archives, we have wonderful account book. George Macculloch took meticulous notes about his business transaction. So this account book goes from 1810 when they moved to Macculloch Hall, and it actually goes through 1898 after George died, and some of the grandchildren actually took over the account book, but it wasn't as meticulous at that time anymore. But George did it right through 1857. He died in 1858, so he did it most of his life at Macculloch Hall. And then in there is a detailed crop journal, which he kept from 1829 to 1856. George Macculloch is credited for recording that he grew the first Jersey tomato. So the little arrow that I have there is, it says tomatoes. The first Jersey tomato that's recorded. Now George gets credit for a lot of things being the first at. Whether he was actually the first at any of these things is questionable. 1829. 1829. So as I mentioned, they had 26 acres of land, grew lots of fruit and vegetables. Mrs. Macculloch had a rose garden back there. Lots of different things. You could see all the different veggies that they grew here. If you take a look at the start of the second page, you could see some of the fruit they grew. And if we take a look at this slide, we have a later map from the 1840s that shows the farmland that they had. So the front of the house would actually be on the left side of the paper there. The Collis property was on the right side if you're facing the building. That's where the Macculloch's property always ended. And then their property went back about 3 blocks. If you're familiar with Morristown, went back to where about Thomas Jefferson School is, and it went over to about where Assumption School is, about a block over that way. So that was the Macculloch's original farmland. At the top there, all of those are apple trees. They had orchards on their property. So farming was very important. George Macculloch was a gentleman farmer. They used what they farmed. They had barrels of hard cider. They grew grapes, had wine cellars, as well as their root cellars in the basement. The building had 4 full floors, so the whole basement was used for storage a lot. Being that he was a farmer, he helped to start the Morris County Agricultural Society. And this was very important. George Macculloch felt that northern New Jersey farmers didn't get the respect that they needed. He became also the first president of the Agricultural Society. So I think you may be getting by all the slides of the farmland, of the Agricultural Society, how important agriculture was to George at the time. Okay, so now we get to some of the influence that George had. And as I was doing research, it was just amazing, all the people that he met. So he had a trip in 1835, so after he was out of the canal business, to the White House and met President Andrew Jackson. He was not a fan of Jackson at the time, but when he met him, we have a quote, and it says that he is not as feeble as I had imagined. It's actually a compliment coming from George, because he didn't think very much of Andrew Jackson. He also met John Quincy Adams, who he said is the most sensible and profound and learned. So he actually did like John Quincy Adams a bit. On that trip, he also met Henry Clay and John C. Calhoun. So he knew very influential people at the time. Just like with the canal, where he knew Dewey Clinton, Governor Dickinson, and many other powerful people in New Jersey, New York, and the surrounding areas. So pretty important person, pretty influential person. Today, the kids are always talking about influencers that they watch on the social media pages. And I think George Macculloch was an influencer of his time. if he was around now during social media, I think he would be known as an influencer as well. So again, I show the portrait of George Macculloch, but this time I wanted to point out the inclined plane, and that's what the arrow is pointing to. So when George Macculloch had his portrait done, he wanted to be recognized as having to do something with the Morris Canal. So he had an inclined plane put in his portrait, which we think is pretty important, that he took so much pride in putting the inclined plane. This portrait was done after he was through with the canal. This was the 1830s, possibly 1840s. We don't know too much about the painting itself. It was done by a New York artist. But just the fact that he put an inclined plane into his portrait is pretty important. And then, of course, we've all heard the story, the legend that George Macculloch had the idea for the Morris Canal while he was fishing on Lake Apacong in June of 1822. And he believed a canal running through northern New Jersey could help support the local farms, struggling iron industry, and help promote a new fuel source, anthracite coal. So that's the saying, or the sort of party line that we've all heard many times. Whether he was the first person, we think he's probably not the first person to have the idea. But I do think that his promotion of the canal did help lead to something, at least. We've partnered with the Canal Society on several occasions over the years. We were able to do, I looked at this and I couldn't believe it was almost 10 years ago already that we did one of these exhibits. So it's going to be time that we get another canal exhibit going and partner with you all again. But this was a great exhibit, very well received, that we did in 2015. Was able to showcase some of the collection that we have of the Morris Canal, as well as get all the good information from you all into the museum. We have a great inclined plane model, which many of you saw in George's office when you were at the museum. And we have these two wonderful pieces, which were gifts of James Lee to the museum many years ago, with a cable and one of the rails from inclined plane 9W. So what do we do with these things today? As I mentioned, we created touch tours. So those of you who are at the museum got to touch the rail and the cable. And this is in George's office. So in George's office, we interpret the Morris Canal, and that's where we do most of our talking about the canal, with the inclined plane there in the background, the touchable objects, which are actually real artifacts, but we feel are durable enough that people can touch them and should touch them, and people should feel like a part of history. You can also see the map in the background, which is an early map by James Renwick, who George Macculloch knew and worked with in helping to start engineering and planning the canal. We know the canal map is in rough shape. It's very difficult to see, as many people have pointed out to me. It was actually conserved many years ago before I got there, and framed correctly with acid-free materials and so forth. We're hoping one day to be able to conserve it again and hopefully bring it to life a little better, so that it is a little more viewable. This is actually one of the better pictures I have of the map.
Is this on paper or parchment?
It's on paper. So one day we'll get it going again. In our collection, we have this sketch of the Great Pond for George Macculloch. This is the reverse. I just wanted to show you what it says on it. On the back there, has a lot of numbers on the back. Not sure what they mean, never looked into them too much, but just how it says sketch for George Macculloch, and then in pencil is written Great Pond. Here is the front side of it. I know you all have a copy of this in your archives, but this is the original that we have in our collection. Really, really cool piece. Early drawing showing Lake Apacon, showing the Great Pond there and the area around it. So really a cool piece that we have. We know that George Macculloch knew about canals. Coming from Europe, he had to be exposed to the canals of Europe, having traveled around there. In our collection, we have this book, a mineral survey of the Union Canal. The Union Canal in Scotland, which would be built in 1822 when George Macculloch had this idea, but this book was published earlier in 1814, as you see there. So George owned this book. So he obviously was thinking about canals and thinking that possibly maybe they needed one here in northern New Jersey. So the whole Lake Apacon fishing story is a nice one, but I think that the seed was planted much earlier in George's mind about a canal and about what was needed here in New Jersey or in the North New Jersey. This is a quote, and I know it's a little long, and I don't like reading and I don't like holding papers during my talks, but a lot of this is newer to me, so I apologize for that. But I think it's a pretty telling quotation, and it's a letter from George Macculloch to Cadwallader D. Colden. And it says, by pouring the produce of the Lake Apacon and western counties into the New York market, it seemed to threaten destruction to agriculture of northern New Jersey, unless some mode of transportation cheaper than teams and turnpikes could be invented. Presiding over the Agricultural Society of Morris County, my mind was naturally turned to this emergency, and during the repose of a fishing party on the banks of the lake, the project occurred to me of converting the vast reservoir so aptly situated into a canal to penetrate New Jersey and connecting the Delaware and Hudson rivers. The immense utility of such a communication was obvious, but the topography of the region to be traversed, the obstacles to be encountered, the expedients for surmounting an uncalculated and enormous elevation were all involved in utter obscurity. The naked project, when started for public discussion, was for these reasons treated rather as an aberration of a dreamer than as the anticipation of a sane mind. So again, I apologize for the lengthy quote, but I think it is a little telling of what George was thinking at the time. And then, of course, I love the little humor that he adds at the end. This is the drawing room at the museum. That's where the portraits of the Maccullochs hang. And I show this, and I have to read one more lengthy quote, and I apologize, but I do think, again, it's important to telling the story of George and what he was thinking about the canal. So this is conveyed by a grandson later on in the 1890s, Henry Miller. And he goes on to say, Mr. Macculloch brought with him from the coal fields of Pennsylvania a bag of coal, which with his characteristic optimism and enthusiastic enjoyment of anything and everything new, he carried into the drawing room, this room here, as the family and guests sat around the Franklin stove. And the stove you see there is actually the same Franklin stove that they had. After dinner, he threw several lumps onto the hickory embers, said that he wanted to demonstrate the value of fuel of the future. Of course, the fire and the andirons of the old Franklin had little effect on the hard lumps. And when the party retired to their rooms, the coal was still in about the same condition as when it was thrown into the fire. I'm afraid, remarked one of the ladies, that you have wasted much strength and time in bringing those stones so far. Plenty as good and perhaps better may be found on the hill behind General Doughty's residence. You may laugh, my dear lady, he replied, enjoying the humor of the situation, but the day is not far distant when there will be large demand for these stones, as you call them, greater, I predict, than the Morris Canal will be able to carry. So I think that gives you a little more information on what was going through his mind, why he thought the canal was going to be a good idea, the agricultural role benefits and the benefits of coal, and hopefully bringing the iron industry up. But George Macculloch was basically a promoter of the canal. He was a big cheerleader for the canal, but for only about a 5-year period from 1822 to early 1827. He got back involved 25 years later. So in 1853, when he would again purchase Morris Canal and Banking Company stock again, of course, this was when the canal started to do a little bit better. So how did he promote the canal? Well, he wrote articles under pen names, pseudonyms. So in 1822, as Agrestes, he wrote in Morristown's Palladium of Liberty, Morristown's most popular newspaper. And this started out his promotion of the Morris Canal. He would continue that 2 years later as Publicola, which meant friend of the people. And this was a little greater, promoting the canal throughout the state. This appeared in Newark's New Jersey Eagle, as well as 8 other newspapers throughout the state. And then again in 1827, as Levi, again back in the Palladium of Liberty, he would help promote the canal. He was writing anti-Masonic essays and political essays to get some of the party members elected that he wanted. My voice always does this. Thank you very much. So he was just a huge cheerleader of the Morris Canal. But besides promoting the canal, he was promoting himself. He was a self-promoter as well. He wanted the people who he wanted elected as politicians in office, obviously for his own gain. So it wasn't all just selfless to help Northern New Jersey. He did want to have his own gain as well. So what did he say in some of these? I just have a couple examples. Canal is only a strip of 10 or 15 yards wide. It can therefore come to the very door of only a few persons, but the route should be as to enrich a large district. And of course, the large district he was talking about was Northern New Jersey, specifically Morris County, in George's mind. And let me remark, however, that no possible navigation through New Jersey can combine in any degree the particular advantages of our own. None can be as useful to the people. Where could so many manufacturers spring up? Where would demand for coal forges and furnaces be equal? I see no reason why New Jersey should be restricted to one canal. Let us have as many as can be found profitable. But if there is to be only one, that one should be pursue the route proposed. And of course, that was the Morris Canal, his canal in his mind, or as a lot of people called Macculloch's Canal to him. This is one of your great letters from your archives that Joe shared with me, and I was very happy to see this. And when I shared it with the rest of the staff and our archivists, we were all real excited. We have a copy of it in our archives now. So thank you very much for sharing this with us. And tells his involvement in September of 1822. I have this moment received a letter from Professor Renwick, who says he will be at my house Monday next. We will therefore meet you at Denville on Tuesday morning about 8 o'clock, should the weather not prove stormy, in order to proceed upon our survey of the canal. And it goes on about professor's talents, experience as an engineer. We believe this is to Lemuel Cobb. Do you agree? Okay, good. That's what we came up with as well. Who was also a surveyor on the canal. So a pretty important letter to us at Macculloch Hall, showing some of the people that George was talking to in his own hand. which is just priceless to the museum. A couple of things we have in the collection, which are related to the letter, are a couple stock transfer of Lemuel Cobb in the 1830s. This was after he passed away, and the certificates were being transferred out of his name. A couple letters that we have in the collection that I just took very brief quotes out of that I thought were kind of funny and pretty pertinent to what we're talking about today. So this is a letter from Mary Macculloch, the Macculloch's daughter, to her brother Francis, the Macculloch's son. And she says, Mama and Papa are both so busy, the one with making arrangement for the boy's departure and the other settling his canal matters previous to his campaign at Trenton. And this was in 1824. And then this was when George was going down to Trenton for the New Jersey legislature convening. And this letter was written just a few days before that, I believe. By the end of the year in 1824, the Morris Canal and Banking Company was chartered. So something did come out of those meetings. This is Senator Jacob Miller. He married Mary, the daughter of the Maccullochs. And he also had a role in the canal and a role in the Maccullochs' history. He met Mary because George had hired him to sort out some of his canal issues. When George was trying not to let speculators take over the canal, he actually hired Jacob Miller, and that's how his daughter Mary met Jacob, and they would marry. So the Morris Canal actually brought them together. So again, for us, it's a pretty important time. Jacob Miller would go on to do other, he was a lawyer before he was a senator, would go on to represent some people with canal issues in the later 1820s, even after George was done with the canal. So Jacob has his own role in Morris Canal history as well. Then we come to this wonderful quote by, again, his daughter Mary writing to her brother. Good news, father has sold out all his stock, received $1,100 as you could read it. Thank you. For past services, and bid a final farewell to the concern. Thus ends the canal lobby, exclamation point. This is telling very much to us that in the Macculloch household, this was a big issue, and it probably took over dinner conversation most nights. So Mary was very happy that George was getting out of the canal business at this time, February 1827, which is why we're thinking it's probably early 1827 rather than late 1826 that George actually did stop with the canal. But you have 2 exclamation points with good news, 1 exclamation point at the bottom. So that sort of ended George's involvement with the Morris Canal. So what did George do after? He finished up with the boys' Latin school. He met Episcopal Bishop George Washington Doane. He helped Doane found Burlington College down in Burlington County, New Jersey, which ran for about 30 years or so. So education remained very important to them. At Burlington College, 2 of his grandsons attended, Henry Miller and Lindley Hoffman Miller. This is one of the letters that George wrote to Lindley at college. Lindley would go on to lead African-American troops during the Civil War. Then later in life, you have in 1856, George started to lose his eyesight. And that's what this letter talks about. George writing again to his grandson, Lindley, about how he was almost blind in his left eye. His right eye was weakening, but he was hoping to live for another 10 years. Unfortunately, George would pass away just 2 years later in 1858. And I have two obituaries here, one from the New York Times, which mentions the Morris Canal at the end. So the Morris Canal was very important to George, and he did want to be remembered for at least having a part of it. I'm sure in George's mind, he wanted to be remembered as having the idea for it and being the one who started the canal. And then the bottom from the New York Daily Advertiser, how he died with his loved ones around him. It's just more of a sweet ending. He is buried at St. Peter's Episcopal Church, the church that he and Louisa helped to build. You could see the Macculloch name is spelt the way that we spell it today. 5 years later, his wife, Louisa, would pass away, and she is buried right next to him in St. Peter's. And again, I thank you all for inviting me here today and being such a great audience, laughing at my jokes. And if anybody has questions, I'll be happy to try to answer. Yes.
Many years ago, the Canal Society of New Jersey had a float in a parade in Morristown. I can't remember the year, but it's got to be 40, 45 years ago. And it was a flatbed truck that we rented. We put a rowboat on it, and in the rowboat was Jim Lee Sr. And we had a speaker system, and he was saying, I'm fishing on Lake Apacon, and I think it's a great idea to supply the Morris Canal.
That's great.
In all the slides I donated to the Canal Society is a picture of that truck.
Oh, that's wonderful. That's just wonderful. I'm happy to hear that. Yes.
Miller, like Miller Road?
Yes. So Macculloch Avenue and Miller Road are named after the families that lived at Macculloch Hall.
The Millers build the beds next door?
So after George passed away, Jacob and Mary became the heads of household, or actually before George passed away, they became the heads of household. So the Millers were the next generation to live there. And they were the next couple generations, and then till it married into the Post family. But 5 subsequent generations lived at Macculloch Hall until 1947. So a lot of family members lived there. And then the kedge was built by family members. About 3 or 4 of the houses on Miller Road were built by grandchildren of the Maccullochs. Yeah. Yes.
There were cops involved in the Morristown Erie Railroad here in Morristown. I don't know if that's any
To Lemuel. Do you know Joe?
Lemuel himself was a noted character. He was the surveyor to the East Jersey proprietors. And as most surveyors made themselves rich by also acquiring land for themselves. And so he was, as a surveyor, he was hired by Macculloch to figure out exactly, what the elevation change in the canal was going to be and give Mr. Macculloch that rude awakening.
Yes, yes. And we do know that George's calculations were way, way off.
His line went into the iron business, but later generations, they also have been involved in the railroads.
They had. You say they were involved in the railroad?
Lemuel and his sons were from Parsippany, and they were involved in the iron business. They owned forest properties, but I don't know if later generations might also have been involved in railroads.
This is just like a general question. Is it true that Lake Apacon is man-made lake?
Yeah.
I know, Joe.
Yeah.
You saw the picture of Great Pond.
Oh,
And so according to Marty Kane, who was Mr. Lake Apacon, you can still see some of the coves that, still exist, some of the configuration, but they raised the level of the lake 12 feet, I believe.
Is that it?
Something like that. And so it was turned into a much, much larger body of water. But it is a man-made.
Mhm.
And it combined with the pond to the north.
Yes.
Yes, the great pond and the small pond.
Yes.
Little pond. Great Pond was the big section we know today. Little Pond was the northern part, and when it was dammed, they joined together.
Yes.
If he was so passionate about it.
Okay.
And he thought he came up with the idea and he lobbied for it. And
Right.
he was so gung ho. Why after 5 years did he say it?
I think it was part financial, part he didn't get his way. He really, he wanted it state owned, and he wanted representatives from the counties that the canal ran through to represent what was going on. He didn't want private stockholders who could buy it if they had money to buy it. So that was a,
Something about like it was Pennsylvania and New York were trying to take more control.
yeah, there was a lot of New York influence on the canal. I know Pennsylvania too, I guess, but I know a lot of New York influence from the Erie Canal. And he didn't want the New York money coming in and dictating what was going on in northern New Jersey. That was one of the main reasons. I think he also didn't get his way, which was a reason. I think there was many reasons, and he wasn't making money. And he comes from that finance background back in London. So he did no money, and you saw his account book very, very well. So it was a combination of reasons, I believe. But he definitely wanted representation within where the canal was running.
If I may elaborate.
Yes, please.
Other states like Pennsylvania and New York had publicly owned, the canal for publicly owned utilities, which were their own problems.
Use the microphone.
He envisioned his Morris Canal was going to be one of those public utilities. And when the state declined to participate, he hoped that Morris County could finance his dream, which, could not happen. There was not the kind of financing available, even in a county like Morris. So New York speculators, those horrid people with controlling the money market, were going to be involved, and he did not like that.
The other issue is the Morris County iron industry, the North Jersey iron industry.
Okay, everybody's going to get involved here.
That's good. That's good.
Whoa. Another major factor was that North Jersey, more particularly in Morris County, was our iron industry flourished during the War of 1812. Then it dropped back. And there's a wonderful map that he did not show that Joe and I always called the forge and furnace map, but it's a route of the Morris Canal, and it's showing all the forges and furnaces. And it's wonderful that the forge is a box and a furnace is an L. And if there's an X on it, that means it's, I don't know if he uses the term disused, or it's this something that they're not active. And so this was also to kickstart the North Jersey iron industry and get it going again, because like Russia's forge is one that I'm very familiar with in Mendham Township. It was actually started before the War of 1812, and then the next generation took it over, and it really moved. But then things like the iron vein becoming very narrow and not profitable, and then the forge just falling into disuse. So anyway, but I don't think Macculloch was that aware of mining techniques. And anyway, he had this great idea of a way to move iron to market, because the big market for iron was down in the shipyards. So just another little factor.
Thank you. One more?
The very early public meetings of the Canal Society of New Jersey were held in Macculloch Hall.
Yes, yes.
And later on, the directors' meetings were held in his mansion, just on the outskirts of Morristown, which has been demolished and is now an office building.
Wow, wow.
Macculloch also had an interest, I believe, financial in the Pine Creek Railroad at Alair State Park, where for many, many years, one of the Quincy mining locomotives ran. It was a narrow gauge, three-foot gauge locomotive, and it ran in Alair State Park, but has subsequently been returned to Michigan.
Wow, wow. And then Mr. Todd, who started the museum, was president of the Quincy mine for many, many years, and his father before him. And that's where Mr. Todd got all his money, from the copper mines.
There may be some questions online. Jeff?
There are none.
The Upper Peninsula of Michigan has native copper. I think the only place in the States where you can actually mine lots of copper. I happen to have them.
Other questions?
I bought one at the Quincy mine.
Oh, cool.
Okay, thank you, sir.
Thank you all.
That was truly a fine presentation. Once again for Ray. Wrapping up before we adjourn. Do we have any announcements? Bill McKelvey, you have announcements sometimes? Nope.
Well, we got a festival at Whippany Railway Museum on Sunday. Others someplace in the back of my mind.
Okay.
Waterloo Canal Day.
Bill?
Yes, I'd like to announce that we're finally getting the boat back on the canal, and we hope to have not only for Canal Day, but try to continue it periodically during the summer, if we get enough volunteers.
Yes, it takes volunteers. Playing canal boat is fun. Come on, guys. We're doing much better with our relationship with state parks these days. And so we're looking forward to a good year. Don't forget Canal Day, Waterloo Canal Day on the 22nd and Wharton Canal Day on August the 25th. June. Okay, I got to thank our tech support. Thanks for Bill Meyer. We got our new computer system working. Thank you, Bill, and Ken, and Jeff, and Steve for the sound, and for the food. Bobby. And Beth, I believe, so. And Tim for getting the sandwiches. And he was up all night making those sandwiches. Any thoughts or questions before we end for this evening? Thank you for coming. We're going to open up the office in the archives. Please join us there. And again, we hope to see you again in September. Between now and then, we have many, many events, newsletters coming out. And so thank you again for being with us tonight.